This morning is the feast of Saints Charles Lwanga, Saints Dennis Sebagwawo, and Saint Joseph Mukasa, and their 19 companions who were martyred at the end of the 1800s in Uganda. And the reason why they were martyred is because they refused to engage in homosexual acts with the king, who wanted them to be his sex toys. I'm using a little more explicit language, because there's no children at this Mass. So that's why they died. They died because they would not engage in homosexual acts. I mean, what a great set of patron saints to pray against the homosexual agenda that is completely evil. Now, the people who have that temptation, they're not evil. The giving into that temptation is what is evil. Now, to give you about the Ugandan martyrs, Saint Joseph Mukasa, Saint Charles Lwanga, Saint Dennis Sebagwawo, and their 19 companions were martyred, as I said, not just out of fidelity to Christ for just a few years after Christianity was introduced to their country, but they were also martyred because in explicit condemnation and heroic defense of young male pages, not pages of a book, pages as in, think of Middle Ages, young male pages from a king's desire to sexually molest them. When King Mwanga II arose in 1884 to the throne of Buganda, that is the southern part of what is now Uganda, he appointed Joseph Mukasa, baptized 2 years before and a loyal servant of Mwanga's father, King Mutesa, as Major Domo, or chief in charge of his palace and court. The new king literally owed his life to Mukasa, who a few years before courageously captured and killed with his bare hands a venomous snake that was threatening the then prince's life. In addition to his official duties, Mukasa was also the de facto leader of the nascent, that is the newly born Catholic community. Since in 1882, the aging and paranoid King Mutesa had banished the missionaries of Africa, called the White Fathers, from the realm. Their departure left Mukasa as the principal catechist of a growing number of Catholic catechumens, whom he powerfully persuaded to renounce slavery, polygamy, and other practices against the gospel, and to dedicate themselves heroically to serving those in need. Upon becoming the Major Domo, Mukasa appointed a young catechumen, Charles Lwanga, to supervise the court pages, to look after them. A short time later, the two of them began to observe that the new king was homosexually attracted to the teenage pages and was seeking to have them brought into his private company. Ugandan culture at the time accommodated such sexual abuse, especially coming from someone in a position of power. Though just a neophyte, that is, a new Catholic Christian, and a catechumen, Mukasa and Lwanga knew that such behavior was absolutely incompatible with the gospel and determined to do all that they could as good shepherds to protect the sheep entrusted to them from the ravenous wolf in regal garb. Even though Mukasa and Lwanga were willing to die to defend the pages from the king's moral corruption, they did not have a death wish. They first tried to persuade those pages, who could easily disappear from court without any harm coming to their families, to run away. With various ruses, they next began to ensure that the pages who remained were otherwise occupied whenever the king sent for them. Third, they began to teach the pages various ways to avert the king's advances if other measures failed. This strategy worked for a time, but the king eventually figured out what was going on. No longer able to avoid a direct confrontation, Mukasa bluntly rebuked the king for his perverse attraction to the boys in his service. Mwanga was consumed with anger against Mukasa and his fellow Christians, who were helping the boys to avoid his advances. Under the pretext of Mukasa's disloyalty for putting the commands of another king, that is, the God of the Christians, over his own, Mwanga had him executed. A few months later, when the king returned from a trip to see one of the routine victims of his sordid desires, receiving catechetical instruction, which obviously involved teaching on the sins of homosexual activity and sexual abuse, he summoned the catechist, St. Dennis Sebawabo, put a spear through his chest and had the court executioners hack his corpse to pieces. The following day, the king rounded up all the pages and gave them a choice between the Christian God and him, between prayer and the predator, between life and death. He asked, quote, those who do not pray to stand with him, and, quote, those who pray to stand opposite. 3 sided with the king. Charles Lwanga and 26 pages sided with God. Lwanga sentenced the latter to be burned alive, which they were after brutal torture on Ascension Thursday, June 3rd, 1886. Now, in this case, all these pages were between the ages of 14 and 25 years old. So biologically, they were adults. Now, at that time, they would have been considered adults. But biologically, they were. That's why the king's attraction is not pedophilia, but homosexuality. And the king was only 18 years old, at that time. He became king at 16, at the age of 16, but he was king at 18. So this isn't even some old guy, some old creepy guy, preying upon them. This is somebody that's only a few years older or even younger than some of them.